Good morning. I love that song. I'm going to put in another commercial here. I had the privilege of attending the Spectacular Christmas Show at the theater in Crown Center, and it was phenomenal. And Jerome didn't do a very good job of really talking about how he played these various roles, not only with his singing voice, but quite an actor. And he and David were just phenomenal. I saw several of our members there, and they were so proud to see us, and I was so proud to see them. And thank you, Jerome, for that. Your talent is amazing, and you and David did outstanding. I don't know if you know Bill and Steve, but I do. Bill and Steve were discussing finding the right love in their lives. And Bill said, I have thought I was in love 3 times. And Steve said, really? You thought? You didn't know? He says, well, 3 years ago, I cared deeply about this woman who wanted nothing to do with me. And Steve said, so wasn't that love? Bill said, no, that was obsession. Then 2 years ago, I cared really deeply for an attractive woman. She was absolutely beautiful, but she didn't understand me. And Steve said, well, that was love, wasn't it? Bill said, no, that was lust. And just last year, I met this woman on a cruise. She was gorgeous. She was smart. She was a great conversationalist. She had a wonderful sense of humor. Everywhere I followed her, I got this little tingling in my stomach. And then Steve said, so that was truly love? No, that was motion sickness. So I don't know about you, but every now and then we think we've found love, but we're looking for love in all the wrong places. So today I'm going to talk to you about love, but not the romantic kind of love that Steve and Bill were talking about. I want to talk to you about a higher level of love, agape love. True love, starting with love for ourselves. So I'm talking about the love that this third Sunday of Advent speaks of. The coming of love. Advent meaning the coming. There's something coming. There's something we need to expect. There's something exciting on the way. And in order for these to come, these exciting things that are coming, that we talk about every year this time, love brings them in. Love brings faith. Love brings peace. And love brings joy. At the center of it all is love. So do you have enough love in your life? Do you know what love is? As I was thinking about what I would talk about today, as always, I get all these songs in my head. And I could hear Tina Turner singing, what's love got to do with it? What's love but a second-hand emotion? Who needs a heart when a heart can be broken? And then I thought, well, that's not it. I don't think the choir would want to sing that song on Advent Sunday. So I didn't even bother to ask. I mean, I've asked some crazy things, but I thought, no, I'll leave that out. Then I got to thinking about Foreigner. I want to know what love is. I want you to show me. Both of those songs were hits in 1984. Both of them were on each one of the singers' 5th albums. I thought that was ironic. They both made hits in the same year and both on the 5th albums for each of the groups. What's love got to do with it? And I want to know what love is. And then I got to thinking about a song I really liked from about 10 years before by Stephen Stills, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I know some of you, I'm dating myself, but surely a few of you know Crosby, Stills, and Nash, right? I see some nods. Maybe some of you have just kind of heard your parents singing it, around the house. Maybe on the stereo, if you don't know what that is. But I remember them saying, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with, right? Love the one you're with. Well, now, that sounds like a romantic song, but the way I take it metaphysically, it means love who you are. If you can't be with the one you love, then you're looking in the wrong place. Love yourself first. Love the one you're with. In other words, dance with the one that brung you in this body. So, and then I got to thinking, well, what's another song? Michael Jackson, in 1970, the 4th single hit in a row, put Motown on the map. I'll be there. I'll be there. Do you remember that song? I'll be there. Where there is love, I'll be there. There are over 60% of the songs that were written during classical times were about love. And more than 50% of the modern songs are about love. What does that tell you about love? It's really important. When you see something in Scripture that's repeated more than 3 times, it's usually signifying that it is extremely important. And love is mentioned more than 30 times in Scripture. So I want to tell you a story about this kind of love that I'm speaking of, this agape love, this unconditional love, meaning I don't know you, we haven't even met, but I can look at you and I can say to you honestly, I love you. I love you. And that's real love. I don't need to know your circumstances or your situation, but I can look at you, and maybe you haven't even heard it in a while, so let me say it to you. I love you from the bottom of my heart. So the story is told about a soldier who came home from Vietnam. He called his parents from San Francisco and says, I'm coming home. They hadn't heard from him in a while, and they were really excited. He said, but I need a favor. I have a friend I want to bring home with me. Of course, they said, any friend of yours is a friend of ours. We'd love to meet him. He said, but there's something you should know about this friend. He was hurt pretty badly during the war. He lost an arm and he lost a leg. He stepped on a landmine. He has nowhere else to go. I don't just want him to come visit. I want him to come and live with us. There was a long silence. And his mother finally spoke up and says, I'm sorry about your friend, son. Maybe we can help him find somewhere to live. No, Mom and Dad, he said, I want him to live with us. The father then spoke up, son, you don't know what you're asking. Someone with that kind of handicap would be a terrible burden on us. We have our own lives to live, and we can't let something like this interfere with our lives. I think you should just come home and forget about this guy. He'll find his own way. After a few moments, the son hung up the phone. The parents heard nothing from him. A few days later, they got a call from the San Francisco Police Department, who told them that their son had died after falling off of a building. The police believed it was suicide. The grief-stricken parents flew to San Francisco and were taken to the morgue to identify their son's body. They recognized him, but to their horror, they discovered something they didn't know. Their son had only one arm and one leg. So what's the lesson here when we talk about love? It's easy to love those we consider to be our family. We feel like we have to love them. Or those who are good looking, fun to be around, seem to have it all together. But we don't like people that inconvenience us. We'd rather stay away from people who aren't as healthy looking, aren't as beautiful, aren't as smart as we think we are. So when Tina Turner sings that song, I ask you, what's love got to do with it? In the Gospel of John, the 15th chapter, the 12th verse, Jesus said, a new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. The Gospel records story after story of how Jesus came into this world to teach love. In the Gospel of Mark, the 12th chapter, the 30th verse, we read, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul. And it follows in the 31st verse, and this one is like to the other verse, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you remember that story I told a few weeks ago in Luke, who is my neighbor? Asked the Levite, trying to trick Jesus. And Jesus told him the story of the Good Samaritan. When the priest and the Levites walked by an injured man and pretended they didn't see because it made them uncomfortable. A Samaritan who was considered the lowest of the low in their society came along, picked the man up, cleaned him off, put him on his donkey and took him to an inn. What's love got to do with it? He didn't know this man. He didn't care that he was different than he was. Because that's love. Jesus goes on to say in that commandment, there is no greater commandment than these, that you love one another, that you love your neighbor as yourself. And we often miss the as yourself part, which is the most important part of that scripture, because if you don't love yourself, I venture to say it's difficult, almost impossible for you to love anyone. You might think you do. You might get that little tingling in your stomach, like Bill said to Steve, but that's not necessarily love. So how do we apply this in our lives? Two of my favorite TV shows on Sundays is CBS Sunday Morning and 60 Minutes. I watch them religiously. So I have to watch CBS Sunday Morning in the evening because I record it because I'm here at church. And I always like the human interest stories the best. Last Sunday, the story is about a young man who had a very difficult life. I don't know if you saw this or not, but it really touched me deeply. And it really explained to me how powerful love can be, unconditional love. So this young man by the name of Ryan Speedo Green was in trouble. He was mad at the world. He was angry with his life. He grew up in a home with just his mother and his brother, and his mother was abusive. Because our parents can only teach what they know at their level of consciousness. And I hope we all get this, because we all have parents who've had dysfunctions, and we have too, and their parents did too. And often when I counsel people about issues that they have from their parents, we talk about this. Your parents can only teach what they know from their level of consciousness and their consciousness of love. But we can break the cycle by being more loving to ourselves first, and then we can love others the way we wish to be loved. So Ryan Speedo Green is a little boy of 12. And he gets in fights every day at school, and the teachers can't do anything with him. He's out of control. Now, they know there's something wrong, but nobody does anything. And then Ryan gets in a heated argument with his brother and his mother and pulls out a knife and gets ushered off to juvenile detention center. On the show, he takes the interviewer into this little cell where he said that night he screamed and yelled and cried, and nobody came to his rescue. And so Ryan has this fourth grade teacher. He's in fourth grade. And she saw something in Ryan that others may not have recognized. And she came to see him at the detention center. And she said something that changed his life from a 12-year-old. Don't let this moment define you. Don't let this moment define you. You are love, made in the image and likeness of love, of God. God is love, and therefore you are love. Ryan Speedo Green, from a troubled childhood, used those words to turn his life around. And the teacher was sitting there during the interview last Sunday, holding his hand, who said to him, don't let this moment define you. Elizabeth Hughes knew the power of unconditional love to change the life of a 12-year-old who today sings with the New York Metropolitan Opera. He's a bass baritone, and he has an amazing voice, almost as good as Jerome's. So what was this teacher saying to him? Don't let this moment define you. She's saying, learn to love yourself. No matter what your outer circumstances are, you have the power within you to love you. And when you love yourself, people will recognize you. You walk in the room and the lights get brighter because they can look at you and tell, here's a person who loves themselves. And here's a person, because they love themselves, I know they love others unconditionally. So whatever your Christmas season brings up, and many of us have issues that we've had in our past that we're still dealing with, and maybe even in the present, don't let this moment define you. The only definition for you is love. You are love. It reminds me of another song Whitney Houston sang, The Greatest. Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. It cures everything. So I'll go back to my thesis statement. What's love got to do with it? Everything. Everything in your life. Ryan Speedo Green was hungry for love, and all he knew how to do was to act out in the classroom. The young man who was injured in Vietnam was calling out to his parents to love me just as I am, and they just didn't understand that he was the friend that he was bringing home. So during this Christmas, let's remember the real reason for the season. It's not if you care enough to give the very best. It doesn't put you in the driver's seat. It's not about what's in your wallet. It's about love. And it doesn't cost you a thing. The advent or coming of love the Christ child would bring to this world is what this story is about. Jesus came to teach us to love. And the stories about him in the scripture tell how he looked at every situation through the eyes of love, even when others told him that it was not the right thing to do. He saw everyone the way we should see others, through the eyes of God. Through the power of love, he made the blind to see, the lame to walk, the dead to live. And what does that mean, the dead to live again? It means that some of us may be dead in spirit. We may be the walking dead. We may not have this great spirit of Christmas that seems to be on all the television ads. We may have had some things in our past that make us feel unworthy, unloved, but we can turn that around by affirming, I love myself just the way I am. Mother Teresa said, the hunger for love is much more difficult to remove than the hunger for bread. And you know that's the truth. Many times when you see people holding up a sign and says, I'll work for food, or I'm hungry, or I don't have a job, or whatever, they're really saying, I just want love. I want love. And we give that love in many different ways. We give the love to meet other people's needs. We try to love wherever we go, in every way that we do. So, I suggest to you that if this idea of loving yourself and then loving your neighbor as yourself reaches at the core of your being today, where you feel you could do more of this, and the more love you give, the more you get. I mean, if any of you have too much love in your account, I'm sure there are others who will raise their hands and be glad to get a loan from you. The secret is to be loved, you have to love. To be loved, you have to love. So that means you have to let go. You have to let go of the need to control everything in order to be the love you want to see in the world. And then you'll realize that with it comes the faith, the peace, and the joy that you need to overcome any obstacles in your life. If you look inside yourself, and how do you do that? How do you look inside yourself? I don't know about you, but I'm claustrophobic, so I don't like MRIs. I've only had one. And I don't, if that's the only way that they can look inside me, I'd really not like to do that. But how do I look inside myself? Prayer and meditation. What we teach in Unity. The silence is where love is. Looking into the eyes of a stranger. Why don't you try that right now? Look at somebody you don't know, if there's someone nearby that you don't know, haven't met. And you don't even have to say the words. Just think the words, I love you, and watch the expressions change. Just take a moment and do that. Just look around. Look across the room. Look everywhere you can, and just in your mind's eye, take the time to look in each person's eyes, and in your mind say, I love you. And watch the smiles come on their faces. It doesn't take much. It doesn't cost anything to tell someone that you love them. You don't even have to say it out loud, and they'll feel it. If you help somebody in need with no expectations of anything in return, that's love. Remember Secret Santa? He started a movement that still goes on around the country and some parts of the world, just showing love to people he didn't know. He'd give a $20 bill at a Goodwill or a Salvation Army. He'd see somebody in there shopping, and he didn't care if they had money or not. It was his way, because giving doesn't come from, it has nothing to do with the person you're giving to. It comes from you. When you give love, you get it. And it may not even come back from the same channel through which you gave it, but it will come back to you. So stop looking for love in all the wrong places and look inside yourself. Ask yourself today, how can I treat myself in the most loving way right now? You're doing that because you're here. Your being here is an example of how you show love to yourself. Listen to your heart, because as Scripture tells us, out of the mouth the heart speaks, and you'll find the answer to the question. No matter what the circumstances are in your life, what's love got to do with it? Love is its own reward. Thomas Merton said, we do not exist for ourselves alone. And it's only when we are fully convinced of this that we begin to love ourselves and thus love others. So I invite you to think about that as we move into meditation. What's love got to do with it? And how can I love myself today?